I'm a critic who writes about art and culture. I and my husband have resided in the area since 2014. And as Steve mentioned, my involvement with the arts in this area has taken a number of forms. I teach art history and film history at the College of the Redwoods. I work at the Ink People Center for the Arts. And some of you may have seen my byline in the North Coast Journal, where I've been a regular contributor on art since 2015. I'd like to thank the Humboldt County Historical Society, before I go any further, for having me back to talk about art, especially Joanne Bauer, Steve Lazar, and Corinne Balkovic, who have been a lot of help helping me, getting me set up for today's presentation. I love being a member of the Historical Society. I love reading my Humboldt historian each month, and I can't wait until it's possible to get into those archives and do some research in person later this year. So it's great to be here, and I'm happy to see that so many of you have been able to join us today on the Zoom. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. And just a moment, please. Hopefully you're now able to see my presentation. So I'll get started. Public art can be defined as art that's located in a public site that can be seen by a broad cross-section of the community. This is a category that's separate from memorials, and it's also distinct from the rich tradition of Indigenous art addressed to and created by the community, which has a much more extensive history in this region. Today, I'm focusing on Eureka-based works of public visual art, mostly murals, whose public appearance has happened in public through the permission of individuals, businesses, state and federal agencies. I'm going to make the case that mural creation falls into three periods: an early history from 1936 to 60, a period that roughly spans the 20 years from 1984 to 2004, and a third period that gets started in the 2010s. I'll be looking at works from all three periods to examine how style has changed and show why I think the murals of the 2010s represent a significant change in the way works of public art in the city represent the city to itself. The key difference has to do with temporality. Over time, regional mural painting practice has shifted. In Eureka, public art was used first to tell stories about the region's distant past, but over the past decade, it has started telling stories about the present. You can trace the origin of public art in Eureka to the point in time where it began for many small and mid-sized American cities with the WPA project in the 1930s. The Works Progress Administration, or WPA, was an American New Deal agency established in 1935 to carry out public works projects during the Great Depression. Between 1935 and 1943, the WPA employed 8.5 million people, more than 10,000 of whom were artists and craftspeople. During the same period, comparable but separate New Deal art projects were being administered by the Department of the Treasury. One of those, the Treasury Relief Art Project, which was in existence from 1935 to 1938, founded 89 mural projects and 65 sculpture projects in federal buildings nationwide, including 5 murals in Eureka's post office. Mining and Forestry, which you see here on the screen, I hope, by Thomas Lehman, who is an artist from Washington State originally, who did a lot of work under the auspices of the WPA project. This is one of 5 murals that Lehman created in 1936 for the Eureka Post Office and Courthouse. One of them is titled Mining and Forestry. Another is titled Water and Land. And there are 3 smaller pendant pieces, one of which features a doe and a fawn. After the federal post office building was sold in 2003, those murals were transferred by the U.S. General Services Agency to the new federal courthouse in McKinleyville, where construction began in 2013. And to my knowledge, they reside there today at this time. Thomas Lehman was a well-connected public artist. He was a member of the San Francisco Arts Association and the California Society of Mural Painters, where he was serving as treasurer the year that he painted this mural. He worked for the WPA, serving as art administrator for 4 Northwestern states, Oregon, Washington, Montana, and Idaho, and he made WPA paintings and murals for public sites, including, in addition to Eureka, San Mateo, Whittier, and the Oregon State College. Now, 20 years after Thomas Lehman completed his Eureka pieces, the construction of a new courthouse building in Eureka occasioned the creation of another work of public art, this time in mosaic. Unfortunately, the identity of this mosaic's creator has not been recorded, but it seems likely that it may have been commissioned or otherwise provided by the building's architect or contractor. The courthouse was dedicated in 1960. Here's a detail where you can see a sort of pixelated effect created by the mosaic panels. So if these 2 works are the beginnings of public art in Humboldt, what do they tell us about the place? It's a question that I posed to myself as I started to think about this. Lehman's picture, to start with the earlier piece, celebrates the working man. It's about the miner, the gold panner. In its depiction of working laborers and the smooth, rounded forms of the figures, and its use of bird's eye perspective, and its expository composition, which uses a sort of zigzag composition device to draw the eye down this vertical format canvas. In all these ways, Lehman's work, like that of many 1930s American muralists, shows the influence of the great generation of Mexican mural painters who had reinvigorated the idea of public art beginning in the 1920s. Jose Clemente Orozco, Diego Rivera, and David Alfaro Siqueiros influenced United States mural painting directly, completing major commissions in this country and training dozens of studio assistants, many of whom went on to execute murals of their own under the auspices of the WPA. Lehman's work, like those of many 1930s California muralists, shows the influence of Diego Rivera in particular. Here's Rivera's mural, one of 3 great murals that he executed in San Francisco. This is the Allegory of California, located in the San Francisco Stock Exchange. Lehman, who was well connected in San Francisco public art circles during the 1930s, would have been familiar with Rivera's work and may well have crossed paths with him. Rivera and Frida Kahlo, who he was married to at that time, had visited San Francisco from 1930 to 31 as the guests of several prominent citizens and patrons of the arts. While he was in residence, Rivera completed 3 major murals in the city and exerted a profound influence over the younger generation of public artists. When Thomas Lehman worked on the outside pylons of the San Francisco Stock Exchange, which he did a few years previous to completing his murals from Eureka, Rivera had also already executed his celebrated mural, The Allegory of California, on the interior of that very same building. So, turning our attention from the mural by Lehman to the untitled mosaic at the county courthouse again, I'd like to talk about some of the themes that we see depicted here. In the foreground, superimposed on top of a huge line drawing of Humboldt County, stands an enormous lumberjack resting an axe between his booted legs. Over his head in bird's eye perspective, this is a little hard to see, so I'll toggle back and forth between my images. Over his head, a man and a woman head for a homesteading idol with livestock and a windmill that's visible in the middle distance. Small figures saw down redwoods in the lower right-hand corner. You can see them just down here at the corner of the mosaic there. The hills that are visible beyond, denuded of their forest, are ready for development. Tiny figures can be seen surveying, navigating, packing, logging, and mining. Everyone in the picture, except for one, is a man, and most of them are carrying guns, paddles, or saws. A river makes its way into the composition towards the lower margin. It appears as a handy conveyance for the logging industry, with a tiny logger riding a log down the river and 4 tall smokestacks of a timber mill rising at the end of the bay. You can see those, they're located towards the lower left-hand corner, just to the left of the lumberjack's leg there. So if we turn back to Lehman's painting, this is likewise not an image of the present, but of the past. Gold panning of the sort that is being shown here was not being done at scale in Northern California by the 1930s. Indeed, such techniques had been obviated by more aggressive methods, such as hydraulic mining, as early as the 1870s. This image shows gold mining the way a dimly remembered ancestral generation might have done it. The mining technique is anachronistic. The painting's timeline is indeterminate, with the neatly coiffed short haircuts and smooth shaves, perhaps the only indicators that might place these miners in the 1930s, not the 1850s. The miners themselves are not strongly individuated. Their eyes are downcast on their work, and there's a kind of hushed quality to the picture, with its narrow bandwidth of quiet earth tones, as if the main figures are sleepwalking. That same anachronism characterizes the mosaic. People hadn't been leveling redwoods in any significant numbers using 4 hands on a long double-bladed saw since maybe the 1850s, 100 years before this mosaic was designed. Like Lehman's painting, it depicts and celebrates the early days of white colonization of the region. These artworks' positions in physical space, over the counter in the post office or over the door of the courthouse, are important. Their significant locations make them a mid-century secular equivalent of the images of judgment that were carved over the portals of Gothic cathedrals. They address themselves to the viewer directly, making a statement about who we allegedly are and laying out some of the implicit principles under which we operate. These early works of public art have a retrospective quality. They construct a genealogy, propose a history, and lay out a theory of who we are and what we value. In both works, the people who are represented are not our contemporaries, but our forebears, our patriarchs. The world they inhabit is a white man's world that places the accumulation of wealth through resource extraction at the center of its priorities. Forests and rivers are represented as reservoirs of substances that are fungible as cash. These public works predict a world where the forest will progressively disappear to be replaced by ranching conducted on clear-cut pastures by the members of tidy nuclear families. The land is shown as a valuable thing that is ripe for the taking. It's the same ethos enshrined in the city's Latin name, Eureka, I found it, in Latin. It rebrands a grand appropriation as an amazing serendipitous discovery, erasing the presence of the land's indigenous inhabitants, recontextualizing the land's theft and the attempted destruction of native cultures. Themes of industrialization, resource extraction, and the land's conquest were certainly not unique to Eureka at this time. They characterized much 19th and 20th century art made in California especially. For instance, see Rivera's Allegory of California, which, like Lehman's painting, also features a redwood stump in a prominent position in the lower left-hand quadrant of the painting. And I think you can see that redwood stump here in its position in a very similar place relative to the overall canvas in Thomas Lehman's picture. So I'm going to move into my second section here, which deals with the years from 1984 through approximately 2004, period I'm calling the past perfect. Despite these examples that I've been talking about, a true mural painting movement did not spring up in Eureka until the 1980s and 90s. It did so, arguably, largely as the result of one artist, Dwayne Flatmo, who collaborated successfully with building owners, city leaders, and local youth to make more than 50 murals in the area, starting with his very first on the side of the Bucksport sporting goods store in 1984. And that mural exists in two panels, as you may know, one for each side of the sporting goods store. Here you see the one side which shows frontiersmen directing a canoe down a roaring stream, and here's the other side where we see possibly the same group of pioneers camping by the side of the stream and keeping their eye out for a bear on the other side of the river. This pair of murals shows how the nostalgic styles that dominate public art do not necessarily always reflect the taste of an individual artist, but rather those of patrons, or in some cases of the community. The shop owners owned the rights to a painting by L.W. Duke, an artist and illustrator active in the 1970s and 80s, who worked primarily on sporting and Old West themes. He's best known for his work for one client, Remington Knife, for whom he painted heroic trappers and frontiersmen straight out of John Ford or Zane Grey Westerns. This image depicted 19th century mountain men struggling with river rapids. Flatmo used a grid to scale it up and replicate it on the side of the Bucksport building. Flatmo's painting, after a design by Duke, was a living bridge to the earlier 20th century stirrings of public art in the city. But the tenor of the depiction had changed, and so had the painter's style. In this painting, Flatmo produces an accurate imitation of mid-20th century commercial art styles, rather than drawing on the work of the Mexican muralists who had inspired Lehman. The theme remained the same, depicting the past, purveying an origin myth, and telling a story about the way this place was founded and the values that shaped its growth. Other artists, in addition to Flatmo, soon began making murals with a similar retrospective theme. For instance, C.R. Spicer's 1995 Firehouse Alarm and Horse-Drawn Wagon. During the 20 years from 1984 to 2004, Eureka, a city which until that time had had no large-scale outdoor murals, acquired at least 26. Of that number, more than 30% are regionally oriented history paintings that represent different, clearly delineated areas in the city's past. Many of the murals on such themes are particularly large and prominent commissions that continue to exert a powerful presence on city streets today. For the viewer moving around the city in the course of errands or business, these compellingly rendered visions of a visually attractive and prosperous past create a kind of silent history lesson that we imbibe as we move around the city. Their combined effect is impossible to ignore. After his initial treatment of the frontier, Flatmo produced images that traveled back in time to the world of 1930s aviation for Murray Field Vintage 1930, He later took viewers back to the 1940s in the large mural that he completed for Finnegan and Nason Auto Supply in Henderson Center. I'm showing you the graphic rendering of that mural design here. It features larger than life people doing business at a 1940s garage. Flatmo also returns to the 1920s for a series he made in Indio, California, called The History of Transportation. One Flatmo mural of the period, the Gray Victorian, features a Victorian-era wooden house as its sole referent. His mural series for Pearson's Building Supply, A Landscape of Humboldt County, is a pastiche that represents several elaborate wooden houses in the Queen Anne architectural style popular in Humboldt's 1880s and 90s past, placing them together in a theoretical landscape that combines elements of different individual houses, bringing them into relationship with one another. Like the earlier works of the 30s and the 50s, these murals continue to show scenes of a well-ordered world in times gone by. However, the emphasis has changed. The newer artworks feature, on the whole, an idealized past in which the human presence has been somewhat reduced and removed. There are humans in these murals, but their presence is part of the landscape and they do not always appear to be fully individualized. In contrast to the WPA era project's emphasis on actual work and workers, it's interesting that almost no one is working in the murals that get made in Eureka during the 1990s and early 2000s. One exception does come from the year 2007, when Flatmo was commissioned to depict workers in the Mural Cycle he completed for the North Coast Co-op. Those showed workers, but they were agricultural workers of indeterminate provenance and ethnicity, existing in a golden setting that doesn't necessarily have much in common with the realities of how food gets produced at industrial scale in the late 20th century. The garden in which these happy farmers are harvesting looks more like Arcadia than any specific California place. Returning to A Landscape of Humboldt County, I think that one is one of the most interesting works from this period because of the indeterminacy of its reference points. This scene represents a pastiche of architecture in Victorian styles, as I've said. Its large scale and its trompe-l'oeil character make it seem as if this sunny land is a continuation of the space where shoppers park. You can pick up on that effect in this photograph, I think. The way that the image is scaled makes it look from many angles as though it actually continues on the other side of these support beams. That's the trompe-l'oeil or fool your eye effect. Victorian houses face one another across the street in the different panels of this mural on manicured lawns that make it look like an 1890s gated community. It's a landscape fantasia where pet corgis, at least I think that's what this is, make smiling eye contact with the viewer, but no human beings seem to exist. We may not be able to connect this representation with any single place, but in a way, that's the point. Generalized appreciation for golden, olden times is the gist of the message that's being communicated. If the WPA created and influenced art of the 30s and 50s was about staking a claim to a regional past, it seems that many murals of the 90s were about the past perfect. As a collective archive, these images exude nostalgia for the heyday of the timber industry and the jobs that logging brought to the region. Avoidance of the human figure furthers that goal, creating pristine reconstructions of clean, safe, attractive, and homogeneous past that are empty and primed for viewers' projections. Certainly, there are also murals produced at this time that undertake to represent the present, including some of the largest and most beloved that were produced during this period. But they don't situate contemporary buildings and people in spatially consistent, believable, illusory spaces. Instead, they adopt a collage approach, and you see that in this mural of the Arkley Performing Arts by Randy Spicer from 2007, And also in this well-known and very imposing piece by Dwayne Flatmo from the same year, Tribute to Architecture and the Performing Arts. Flatmo's historical pastiche and image appropriation was on point for the 1990s in the sense that it was connected to larger national and international trends taking place in the visual arts. Image appropriation, borrowing or remixing, was one of the biggest stories in American art of that period. And here I have a few images that maybe just showcase the breadth of that tendency in the art of the 80s and the 90s. We can see it in everything from David Sally's palimpsest paintings drawing from dozens of different commercial sources to Richard Prince's and Sherry Levine's rephotographed artworks, to the photos that Anne Millet made during that period of military reenactments in her Small Wars series from 1999 to 2002. In other art forms, the 1990s is the decade of sampling. It's the period when the remix became the dominant form in the arts. In postmodern architecture and in rap music alike, historical styles got reactivated as building blocks for a new eclectic composite. The 1990s was the heyday of postmodernism, when everything seemed on the verge of dissolving into text. The architectural theorists Michael Venturi, Denise Scott Brown, and Stephen Isnivor wrote Learning from Las Vegas, which proposed that a building was a thing to be read. Jean Baudrillard wrote that the infiltration of media into every nook and cranny of daily life meant that it was no longer possible to reliably distinguish life from simulation. Disneyland's simulacrum of community in Main Street, USA, was a model for the way we lived. The art critic Nicolas Bourriot observed that rather than developing or moving in a single trackable direction, art's movement was now characterized by the constant churn and remix of prefab options, sort of like a shuffle of presets. A third phase of mural development starts to emerge around 2017 in Eureka. That was the year that Kevin Bourquet of Eureka's Black Fawn Art Project Group invited two English artists to come to Humboldt to make murals on a scale and of a subject matter that had not been seen before in this town. Here I'm showing you Electric City by the artist known as Dank, also known as Dan Kitchener, an Opera Alley, which is one of these two commissions. The London-based artist Dan Kitchener made this mammoth streetscape, Electric City, inspired by images of Shinjuku in Tokyo, Japan. As Dank's process unfolded in the public eye that summer of 2017, the engaged public reception that his mural received showed that city residents enjoyed the opportunity to take part in the process and watch the artworks take shape in public view. 2017 was also the year that Eureka developed a strategic arts plan. Michelle Cartledge, Jenna Katzos, and Swan Asbury came together to form an organization called the Eureka Street Art Festival, a Dreammaker project of the Ink People's Center for the Arts. The first festival happened in the summer of 2018, and it's taken place annually since that time, with a fourth renewal scheduled for this summer. But that's not the only important event that took place in relation to public art around this time. In 2019, the city of Eureka and the Ink People partnered to redefine the retaining wall along the Eureka waterfront by Halverson Park as the Eureka Live Art Wall, lending official recognition to the graffiti tags and pieces that had long flourished in this public environment. Here I'm showing you a detail of the wall as it existed in 2019. Managed by the artist Phyllis Barba, the wall holds temporary pieces by multiple artists, and the idea is to have artists paint over the other pieces on a semi-regular basis. So what you see at any given time is always evolving on a seasonal basis. This ever-changing space is where some of the city's most interesting formal experimentation takes place, at the crossroads of mural painting and graffiti tagging. These changes reflected ones that were happening elsewhere in the country and in the world, as new forms of public art became engines of neighborhood renewal in cities in America and around the globe. Barba has said that the live art wall was inspired by the Venice art walls of Los Angeles. You see a photo of those in the lower half of the screen. Bourquet, a fan of the street art scene, learned about artists like Dan Kitchener through trips to Art Basel in Miami and new street art venues like the Wynwood Walls Urban Graffiti Art Museum District, also in that city. WPA murals and the social realist styles they tended to feature no longer dominate the aesthetic at this time. Artists associated with this late 2000 teens mural renaissance drew inspiration from a new source, the graffiti writing and street art that was invented by working class Black and brown young people in New York and other East Coast American cities, starting in the late 1970s. Showing you some classic tags from the early 80s on subway trains in New York, and a publicity still from the film Wild Style, which documented that scene from 1983. Street art was based on graffiti, but not narrowly limited to it. And it went on to flourish in the 1980s and early 90s. And since that time has captivated the imagination of audiences worldwide. In many American cities, its popularity has had the effect of expanding ideas about the kind of public art that might be possible. By using the term street art in its name, the Eureka Street Art Festival signaled this new genealogy and a new inclusivity. The first two murals commissioned by the Black Fawn Art Group in 2017 represented the city's first works of public art made by international artists. In the years that followed, the Street Art Festival and the Live Art Wall have fostered a new openness and inclusivity by paving the way for the creation of more works of art in a wider variety of styles than ever before. We see, for instance, the innovation of purely non-objective and abstract images. Mr. Jago's attention-grabbing pink mural on the corner of 2nd and G represented the region's first pure abstraction in public, and works by Xavi Panetton at the lower left and Ana Sofia Amezcua at upper left soon followed. We also, at this time, last 5 years, have seen the creation of more public art that speaks to the region's growing consciousness of the natural environment, presenting complex ecosystems as something to cherish and preserve. Lynn Jones's mural on the left is one of the first appearances of a redwood tree in public art that makes an ancient tree the subject of a mural in its own right as a living entity, not as a potential reservoir of lumber. In addition to these changes, another way in which the public art environment in Eureka has expanded in the last 5 years has to do with the expansion of art into new modes that can exist alongside traditional murals. Collaborations between the city of Eureka and the Ink People Center for the Arts have generated more opportunities for local artists by inviting artists to work on the city's utility boxes. The Street Art Festival has made it possible for artists to work on portable panels in public sites, as seen in the work from 2018 on the left of the screen. And in the most recent 2020 Eureka Street Art Festival, poets got involved with a sidewalk poetry program that brought lyrics and lines from local poets to the streets and sidewalks of the city. And the image on the right of the screen is a poem called The Salt, created by Izzy Unsinger for the 2020 festival. In the last 5 years, we've seen public art being created in Eureka by a wide variety of artists coming from different circles and subcultures. Eureka experienced its own art version of a British invasion in 2017, as Dank and Mr. Jago came to these shores to bring us their far out visions. At the time, the fact that they were not from here was perceived as provocative in some quarters. But since that time, the Eureka Street Art Festival has facilitated works by artists from Miami, Vancouver, and Buenos Aires. More public art is being made by artists of color, women artists, and artists from local scenes and creative communities that hadn't previously been represented in the city's public sphere. In 2020, the first year of the Street Art Festival's Native Mural Project, 4 murals were commissioned from Native artists Melita Jackson, Carl Avery, Almy Allen, and Julian Lang on the wall of the American Cancer Society Discover Shop in Henderson Center. These changes indicate a change in the course of Eureka's public art, a shift into the present tense. More of the paintings that have been finding their way into the public eye represent contemporary subjects. They represent the present moment, both in terms of the content that they figure and the messages that they convey. The 20th century emphasis on providing origin stories and revisionings of a distant past has waned as engagement with the present through public art has surged. Of the at least 55 public artworks created in Eureka since 2017, just one represents a reprise of the city's distant past. This reflects how the understanding of public art has expanded and shifted, not only in Eureka, but globally, as the influence of international street art forms and approaches have come to supersede a more narrowly defined vision of mural painting that's based in early 20th century practices. Use of the term street art, as I said, originally grew out of the grassroots complex of art forms that developed in and around New York City in the 1970s. The cluster of art forms that developed around early hip hop music, like graffiti writing, street art, breakdancing, and slam poetry, shared its sense of an urgent responsibility to address what's happening now. Street art, like those other forms, was a term with a code and a set of expectations attached before it was anything else. It meant a politically engaged, socially observant art that reflects the conditions of the society around it. As street art became a global phenomenon, it expanded the boundaries of public art by diversifying the range of styles that can be imagined in public space, placing renewed emphasis on public art's connection to contemporary life and times. 2 murals completed in Eureka within the last year seem to address this shift by making the movement from the past into the present their explicit theme. Lucas Thornton's mural on the side of the Redwood Art Association, Walk into Art, is a meta depiction. It's a story about telling stories of the past that shows how art becomes history. His mural shows contemporary viewers entering a gallery in a possibly heavenly space outside of time, where they come face to face with imagined simulacra of art history icons, both giants of art history, but also hometown heroes like Curtis Otto. A witty addition at the margin of the huge mural takes the form of a well-known stencil by the English street artist Banksy, known as the Love Rat, which places the whole thing in quotes and suggests that this whole construction is a whimsical street art notion, possibly appropriated from another well-known artist. Melita Jackson's mural, titled Run, is one of 4 completed side by side as the first commission of the Street Art Festival's Native Mural Project. It shows a young girl engaged in the ritual run that is part of the elaborate 3 to 10 day long ceremonies that constitute the flower dance, the ancient coming of age ritual held for young girls in the indigenous cultures of this region that has been reviving as a living ceremony over the past 20 years. Jackson's mural shows a girl engaged in this ritual run, moving down the riverbed as part of a ritual celebrating growth and change. Her regalia and her ritual attire are traditional, but her t-shirt is clearly contemporary. Like Lucas Thornton's mural, Melita Jackson's piece is in touch with history, but grounded firmly in the present tense. I'm looking forward very much to seeing how this tendency, this movement towards a engagement with our present day life and times, how this continues to develop in the murals that will be created in this city in the years to come. That's going to be the end of my talk today, so thank you very much. Over to you, Steve.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Gabrielle? If you do, just go ahead and pop them in the chat window. Yeah, thank you for that presentation. That was really interesting to see all the different styles, and so many of those I walk past or drive past and I don't even see them anymore. Now I'm paying attention a little bit more.
That happens to me too, but I feel that you're always noticing them at some level of your brain, even if you're not paying a conscious attention to them.
Right.
They get under your skin. I like it.
Okay. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions. I'll wait a couple more minutes just as people are typing away. Yeah, while we're waiting, I'll go ahead and let you know about some other library programs that are coming up in the next week. On Wednesday evening, we have our On the Same Page book group. It's a book group that meets at 5:30 on Zoom. We're going to be discussing The Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz, so that should be a pretty fun discussion. And then on Friday, we've got our Friday afternoon book group, and they will be discussing, and that's at 2:30 on Zoom, and they are discussing This Tender Land by, I don't remember off the top of my head, William Kent Kruger. So that's at 2:30 on Friday. We also have a weekly knitting group that meets on Zoom every Friday at noon, and we have a short story group that meets every Saturday at 1. So if you're interested in any of those and want to sign up, just go to our website, which is humlib.org, click on the calendar, click on the event, and that'll walk you through the sign up process. And other than that, I think we will go ahead and let everybody go for the weekend. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Gabrielle, for your great presentation, and we will catch you next month. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.